She didn't look at me the way people usually do when they realize what I do for a living. She didn't look away fast, or smile too wide, or say, "Oh, that's great," in that tone that means the opposite. She just looked at me. And then she looked at my daughter. And I think that's when I knew this was going to be something I hadn't planned for. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up. My name is Frank Dolan. I'm 41 years old, and for the past 6 years I've been a pipe fitter out of Local 412 in Columbus, Ohio. I work union jobs, schools, hospitals, commercial builds. I'm on a crew by 6 in the morning most days, and I'm home by 4:30 if the traffic on 270 doesn't get ugly. I live in a 2-bedroom rental on the east side, the kind of neighborhood where everybody waves when they pull out of the driveway, but nobody really knows each other's last name. The rent is $1,100 a month. I drive a 2018 F-150 with a crack in the passenger side mirror that I keep meaning to fix. I have a 7-year-old daughter named Rosalind. Roz, she goes by. And I've been raising her alone since her mother left when Roz was 13 months old. I don't say any of that for sympathy. I say it so you understand who I was when this story started. I was not a man who expected anything unusual to happen to him. I was a man who packed a lunch every morning, made sure Roz's backpack was by the door the night before, and tried to get to bed before 10 so I could do it all again. That's the whole of what I was. The morning it started, I was not in a good mood. We'd had a rough week on the job. A section of copper supply line on a hospital expansion in Westerville had gone in wrong, and the GC was breathing down our foreman's neck, which meant our foreman was breathing down everybody else's. I'd been running on 5 hours of sleep for 3 days. Roz had caught a cold and coughed through the night twice, and I'd sat on the edge of her bed at 2 in the morning with a glass of water and a children's Tylenol, listening to her breathe until I was sure she was okay. I had dropped her off at Maple Crest Elementary and was heading back toward the job site when I saw the dog. He was sitting at the edge of the Maple Crest parking lot, right at the corner of the chain-link fence, like he'd been waiting for something and wasn't sure it was coming. Beige and white, a medium-sized mutt, one ear up and one ear flat. No collar I could see from the truck. He wasn't barking or running. He was just sitting there with this look on his face like he had a lot on his mind. I have no idea why I stopped. I was already late. I had nowhere to put a dog. I just pulled over. He let me come right up to him. Let me check behind his ear and under his collar line. Nothing. No chip reader in the truck, but I made a note to call the Humane Society when I got a break. I didn't have anything to give him except half a granola bar left over from Roz's lunchbox. I broke it up and put it in my palm, and he ate it very carefully, like he was trying not to be rude. I looked around the parking lot. The drop-off rush was thinning out. Most parents had already come and gone. There were only a couple of cars left, and one of them, a dark gray Audi SUV, the kind that costs more than I make in a year, was parked a little ways down with the engine running. I figured somebody was waiting for a kid. I didn't think much of it. Then the window came down. She said, "He showed up yesterday." I looked up from the dog. The woman in the driver's seat was maybe 38, 39. Dark hair pulled back. No makeup that I could see, or at least not much. She was wearing a blazer over a plain white shirt, and she was looking at the dog the way you look at a problem you can't quite solve. I said, "You know him?" "No," she said. "He was here when I dropped my son off yesterday morning. I called the school. They said they'd look into it." She paused. "They didn't look into it. He's friendly," I said. "Let me eat a granola bar out of my hand." Something shifted in her face. Not a smile exactly, but something close. "That's more than he did for me," she said. "I tried to get him to come to me this morning, and he just stared." I looked down at the dog, who was now leaning against my leg. "He's got standards," I said. That was when she actually smiled. She looked away from me and looked at the dog again, and she said, "I'm Vivian Marsh." I said, "Frank Dolan." She said, "Do you have somewhere to be?" I said, "About 40 minutes ago." She nodded, like that was a fair answer. "I'm going to call animal control," she said. I wanted to make sure someone was with him until they got here. He was here all night, I think. Someone in the neighborhood texted me that they'd seen him by the fence. "I can wait," I said. I don't know why I said it. I was already late, but I said it. Animal control took 45 minutes. Vivian Marsh stayed the whole time. She made 2 phone calls from the car. Professional calls, the kind where she spoke in a low, even voice and said things like push the board meeting to Thursday and no. Tell them we need the numbers by end of week, not Friday afternoon. End of week, and then she got out of the car and stood near the fence with me. We didn't talk the whole time. That was the part I kept thinking about after. Most people fill silence. She didn't. She just stood there, hands in the pockets of her blazer, watching the dog. At one point she took out her phone to check something, and I saw her face go still for a moment. Whatever she was reading was not good news. And then she put the phone away and went back to watching the dog. I almost said everything okay? I didn't. When animal control finally got there, the woman who climbed out of the truck was young, maybe 25, and she looked tired in the way that people who work with animals look tired. She got the dog to come to her without much trouble. She said he looked healthy, probably just got loose. She'd scan him at the shelter. Vivian Marsh said, "If no one claims him, I'd like to know." The animal control woman looked at her with the polite neutral face of someone who hears that phrase a lot and knows how it usually ends. She said she'd make a note. We walked back to our cars. We were parked maybe 20 feet apart, and for a second we just stood there in that gap. Vivian Marsh said, "Thank you for staying." I said, "Sure." She said, "Do you have kids at Maple Crest?" "Daughter," I said. "Second grade, Roz. My son is in second grade," she said. "His name is Theo. Maybe they know each other," I said. She said, "Maybe," and then she got in her car and drove away. I thought about that for exactly one day, and then I stopped. I had a hospital expansion to finish, a daughter with a lingering cold, a slow drain in the bathroom sink, and a union meeting on Thursday night. Vivian Marsh and her Audi and her board meetings went into the category of things that happened once and meant nothing. The dog, I found out from Roz's teacher about a week later, had been claimed by a family 3 streets over. His name was Biscuit. He had escaped through a gap in a fence. I thought that was the end of it. The thing about Roz is that she talks. She has always talked. From the time she could form sentences, she has narrated everything. The drive to school, what happened at lunch, what she thinks about clouds, a full account of every interaction she had with every person in a given day. When I pick her up from aftercare and she gets in the truck, it's like someone flipped a switch. She doesn't stop for about 40 minutes. I have learned to give the right reactions without actually processing every word, the way you learn to drive and think at the same time. But one evening in early October, she said a name that made me tune back in. "Theo's mom was at pickup today," she said. I glanced at her in the rear view. "Theo from your class? Theo Marsh," she said. "He's really quiet. He doesn't really talk to anybody except me and Jonah and sometimes Corey, but mostly just me and Jonah. His mom came in at the end of the day because he forgot his inhaler and she had to bring it." "Good that she brought it," I said. "She was really nice," Roz said. "She talked to me for like a whole minute about my drawing. I was drawing a horse with too many legs on accident, and she said it looked like a horse that could run faster than any other horse, and I think that was a nice way to say it. I said, 'It sounds like it.' 'Do you know Theo's mom?' Roz said. I said, 'I met her once.' Roz thought about that. Then she said, 'She seemed sad.' I didn't know what to say to that, so I said, 'Yeah?' 'Not like crying sad,' Roz said. 'Like quiet sad, like she had too much in her head.' I didn't say anything. Roz said, 'You get that way sometimes.' I Googled Vivian Marsh that night after Roz went to sleep. I don't know what I expected. What I found was a profile in the Columbus Business First from about 8 months ago. She was the founder and CEO of a materials sourcing company called Vantage Meridian. They worked with large construction and infrastructure contracts, coordinating supply chains for industrial builds across the Midwest. The article said the company had grown from a 6-person operation in a Clintonville garage to a 200-person firm with clients in 11 states. There was a quote from her. "We don't just find materials. We build the relationships that make it possible to move fast when it matters." There was a photo of her in an office, the kind of office with a view. I closed the laptop and went to bed. I am a pipe fitter, I thought. I make good money for what I do. I have a pension through the union, and I live on the east side in a house with a slow drain. I don't have any business thinking about what she seemed like when she stood at a chain-link fence. I went to sleep. Roz and Theo became friends the way 7-year-olds become friends, which is fast and total and hard to explain in adult terms. By November, they were sitting together at lunch. By Thanksgiving break, Roz had told me more about Theo than I probably knew about most adults in my life. that he was scared of thunderstorms, that he was really good at math, but pretended not to be, because a boy in class had called him a nerd once, that he liked to draw mazes in the margins of his worksheets, that his dad was not around, which Roz delivered with the frank neutrality of a kid who knows that sentence means something, but doesn't know exactly what. There was a winter art show at the school in early December. The kids had made mixed media pieces, paint, fabric scraps, found objects, and the school had hung them in the hallway for the families to come see. I took Roz on a Thursday evening. She was wearing the sweater with the star on it that she'd insisted on for weeks, and she walked me straight to her piece. A horse, naturally, with 7 legs, and explained it to me with tremendous seriousness. I was standing there listening to her explain the symbolism of the 7th leg when I felt, more than heard, someone stop nearby. I looked over. Theo was standing about 5 feet away, hands in the front pocket of a hoodie, looking at Roz's piece. He was a slight kid, dark-haired, with eyes that were a little too old for his face. Not in a sad way, just in the way that some kids have where you can see they spend a lot of time observing rather than participating. He looked at Roz, then he looked at me. I said, "You must be Theo." He nodded. I said, "I'm Roz's dad, Frank." He nodded again. And then, very carefully, he said, "She told me about you." I said, "Good things, I hope." He thought about it. "She said you make her hot chocolate with the little marshmallows when she's sick." I said, "That's accurate." He nodded slowly, like this confirmed something. Then Vivian Marsh was beside him, one hand on his shoulder, looking at Roz's piece with the same expression she'd had at the fence. Not quite a smile, but close. We stood there for a little while, the 4 of us, in that particular kind of accidental togetherness that school events create. Roz explained the horse to Theo, who listened very seriously. I asked Vivian if Theo had a piece in the show, and she walked me down the hall to a small painting, dark blues and blacks with a single streak of yellow-orange across the middle. No figures, no animals, just color. He said it's what thunder looks like, Vivian said, from inside. I looked at the painting for a moment. I said, "That's not a bad thing to know how to put down." She looked at me. Not the polite look, the actual look, the same one from the parking lot. She said, "No, it's not." We stood there for a second. Roz was pulling Theo toward the snack table. Theo went, slowly, like a person who has learned to follow someone else's confidence when he doesn't have his own. Vivian said, "I owe you a coffee." I said, "For what?" "For staying with Biscuit," she said. "I found out his name." I laughed. I don't know why that hit me the way it did, but I laughed more than the situation called for, and she laughed a little too, and just like that the air changed. We got coffee from the folding table set up by the gymnasium. Paper cups, the kind that burn your fingers. We stood against the wall while Roz showed Theo something on the snack table with enormous urgency. Vivienne said, "Theo doesn't make friends easily." I said, "Roz makes friends for both people. She's efficient that way." "It's been a hard year," Vivienne said. She said it simply, the way people say things when they're tired of carrying them alone. His father and I separated in January. We're finalizing the divorce in the spring. Theo he's been okay. He's functioning. He goes to school, he does his work. But he's been quiet in a way he wasn't before, and I can't always reach him. She paused. "I don't know why I'm telling you this." I said, "You don't have to stop." She looked at me. I said, "I just mean, you don't have to explain. You can just say it." She held the paper cup with both hands and she said, "He won't talk to the therapist. He'll sit there, he'll answer questions in single words. But he won't, it's like he's waiting for something to prove it's safe." She shook her head. "And I don't know how to give him that. I'm his mother and I don't know how." I was quiet for a moment, and then I said, "I'm not sure you can give it to him. I think it's one of those things kids have to find themselves." She was quiet. I said, "With Roz, when her mother left, she didn't talk about it for almost 2 years. I tried everything, books, play therapy, the whole thing. And then one day she was just ready. She brought it up herself in the truck on the way to the grocery store. She asked me if her mother was ever coming back. I said I didn't know. She thought about it and she said okay, and that was it. I don't know what shifted. I just tried to make sure that when it shifted I was still there." Vivienne looked at me for a long moment. She said, "Where is her mother now?" I said, "I genuinely don't know." She didn't say I'm sorry. I appreciated that. I want to be careful about how I describe the next few months. Because I know how it sounds and I know it's easy to make it into a thing it wasn't, at least not yet. We saw each other at school. We texted sometimes, practical things at first, coordinating pickups because Roz and Theo had started doing after-school activities together, the kind of logistical conversation you have with another parent. When your kids have entered each other's orbit, Vivian texted the way she talked, directly, without a lot of ceremony but not cold. If she asked me something, she asked it once and waited for the answer. If I said something, she responded to what I actually said. That sounds simple. I'm telling you it is not simple. In January there was a cold snap, the kind Ohio gets where the temperature doesn't get above 12 for a week straight. I had a job that got pushed because of the freeze, and I was home one afternoon when Vivienne called, not texted, and said that she was stuck at a client meeting that had run 3 hours long and couldn't get to aftercare by 5:30, and did I happen to be free. I picked up both kids. I took them to a diner near the school, the kind of place with vinyl booths and pie under a glass dome, and I bought them hot chocolate and slices of cherry pie, and I let them talk. Roz talked. Theo listened at first, and then, somewhere around the second slice, I'd let them each have 2. He started talking too. He told me about the mazes he made. He brought out his notebook, he had it in his backpack, and showed me one. It was intricate, more intricate than a 7-year-old should probably be able to make. I said, "This is serious work." He looked at me with those old young eyes. He said, "I made one that took me 3 weeks. I said, "Did you solve it yourself?" He said, "You can't solve your own maze, you already know the way out." I sat with that for a second. Then I said, "That might be the truest thing I've heard all year." He looked at me steadily, and then he went back to his hot chocolate. When Vivienne came to pick up Theo that evening, she came to my house because we'd moved the operation there when it got dark. She stood at my front door with her coat still on and looked at the 2 of them on the living room floor. Roz explaining something about her stuffed animals with great authority. Theo nodding along, his maze notebook open beside him. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, very quietly, so only I could hear, "He hasn't talked this much in months." I said, "He's a good kid." She looked at me. She said, "He is," like she needed to hear someone else say it. I'm going to skip some things. I don't mean to be evasive. I mean there were months of things that built slowly, and I could describe every Saturday morning and every carpool and every accidental 45-minute phone call after the kids were in bed. But it would run together. What I'll say is, by early spring, something had changed, and we both knew it, and neither of us had said anything about it. I want to be honest about what scared me. It wasn't the money, though I won't pretend the money wasn't a fact. Vivienne Marsh ran a company with 8-figure revenue. She had a house in Bexley that I'd driven by once, because I'm human and I was curious, and it was the kind of house with a slate roof and a circular driveway, and a copper guttering that I could identify by trade. I drove a used F-150, and I ate lunch out of a cooler on a job site. What actually scared me was simpler than that. I had built something careful with Roz, a life that was small and reliable, where she knew what to expect and I knew what I could give her. I was not afraid of loving someone. I was afraid of letting that careful thing come apart for the wrong reasons, and then having to watch Roz go through another version of something I hadn't protected her from. So I said nothing. I showed up, I was present, and I told myself that was enough. In April, the school had a daddy-daughter dance. I know what that sounds like in the context of this story. I want to say that I did not think about Vivienne Marsh when I first saw the flyer. I thought about Roz and whether she would want a corsage, which she did, a small one with little yellow flowers, which I got from a grocery store florist for $12, and which she wore on her wrist with the seriousness of someone receiving a state honor. We went. We danced, which for me means moving my feet in a small square pattern and hoping nobody looks directly at me, and for Roz means attempting every style of dance simultaneously without concern for rhythm. It was loud and warm, and the gym smelled like fruit punch and someone's cologne. I was, genuinely, happy. I was standing by the punch table when I heard a voice beside me say, "Nice corsage." I turned around. Vivienne Marsh was standing there in a dress the color of deep green water, with Theo next to her, his hands in the pockets of a small blazer, looking at the dance floor like he was considering whether to approach it. I said, "I don't think this is a mother-son event," she said. "Theo wanted to come. They changed the name this year." It's a family dance now." She paused. "He specifically asked me to bring him." I looked at Theo. He was watching the dance floor. Roz had spotted him and was pushing through the crowd toward him with the focus of a person on a mission. I said, "He looked nervous to you?" Vivienne said, "He looks determined." Roz got to him. She said something, I couldn't hear it over the music, and Theo looked at her and then looked toward us, toward me specifically, with that direct, steady look of his. And then he took her hand and they walked out onto the dance floor. Not ran, walked, like it was decided. Vivienne made a sound that I'm not sure she knew she made. A small, sharp exhale. Like something in her chest had shifted. I looked over at her. She had her hand over her mouth. Her eyes were bright. I said, "Hey." She looked at me. I said, "He's okay." She pressed her lips together and nodded, and there were tears sliding down her face. Just quiet ones, and she didn't apologize for them, and I didn't ask her to. We stood there together at the punch table while our kids danced. After that, I stopped pretending. I don't know how to make that sound less abrupt, because honestly it happened fast. The night of the dance, I drove home with Roz asleep in the back seat, and the corsage still on her wrist, and I thought about what it would mean to say the thing I'd been not saying for 4 months. I thought about what Roz would think. I thought about what Theo would think. I thought about the slate roof, and the copper guttering, and the F-150 with the cracked mirror. And then I thought about her standing at a chain-link fence at 8 in the morning with her hands in her pockets, not trying to fill the silence. I thought about her saying, "I don't know why I'm telling you this." I thought about Theo saying, "You can't solve your own maze, you already know the way out." I texted her that night, late, after Roz was in bed. I said, "I'd like to take you to dinner. Not as a favor. Not carpool logistics. Actual dinner." She didn't respond for 11 minutes. I watched my phone like an idiot. Then she said, "I know a place." The place she knew was not what I expected. It wasn't a restaurant with linen tablecloths, or a place where I would have had to look up the dress code beforehand. It was a Thai place in the short north, small and loud and good, with mismatched chairs and handwritten specials on a chalkboard. We sat at a table in the corner and we ordered too much food and we talked for 3 hours. She told me about how she'd started Vantage Meridian. She'd been working for a large procurement firm and kept seeing the same failures in supply chain relationships. The way large companies talked at vendors instead of with them. The way you'd lose 6 weeks on a project because someone 2 tiers down in the supply chain didn't feel heard. She said, "I kept thinking, someone has to build the trust before the contract. The contract doesn't create the trust." I said, "That sounds like how I think about a job site." She looked at me. I said, "You can read the blueprints perfectly and still have a bad install if the crew doesn't trust each other. The plan is just paper until somebody decides to believe in it." She put her fork down and looked at me for a moment. She said, "Yes, that's exactly it." I said, "I just know it from pipes and copper. You know it from, I don't know, 80-person board meetings, 200 people." She said. I said, "Right." She said, "Does that bother you?" I said, "Honestly, a little, but not in the way you might think." She waited. I said, "It doesn't bother me who you are. It bothers me because I care about getting this right, and there's a version of this where I'm not right for it, and I don't want to pretend I don't know that version exists." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The version where you're not right for it, that's not the version I'm sitting in." I looked at her. She said, "I've been sitting across from men in a lot of rooms who were technically right. Right degree, right connections, right account balance." She picked up her fork. "You stayed with a dog you didn't know on a morning you were already late, and you didn't make it mean anything, you just did it." I didn't know what to say. She said, "I find that very hard to find." I'm going to tell you about Theo, because that's the part of this I want to say carefully. In May, there was a Saturday where both kids were at my place. Roz had invited Theo over, and Vivienne had dropped him off and stayed for coffee, which had extended, as it often did, into the better part of the afternoon. The kids were in the backyard. I had a screen door that I could see them through from the kitchen. At some point, Roz was called inside by some urgent need involving her art supplies, and Theo was left alone in the backyard. I watched him for a moment through the screen. He was sitting on the wooden step at the edge of the small porch, his maze notebook open, not writing in it, just holding it. His face was turned up slightly, and I couldn't tell if he was thinking or just breathing. I went outside. I sat down on the step next to him, not close enough to crowd him, just there. He didn't say anything. I didn't say anything. We sat there like that for maybe 5 minutes. A bird was doing something in the oak tree at the back of the yard. The neighbor 2 houses down was running a leaf blower. Then Theo said, without looking up from his notebook, "Are you going to marry my mom?" I was quiet for a moment. I said, "We're still figuring things out." He thought about that. He looked at his notebook. Then he looked at me. He said, "I think you should." I didn't say anything. He said, "She smiles more, since you." He said it carefully, like he was reporting something he had observed and wanted to get right. Not just regular smiles. The kind she did when I was little. I forgot she could do that kind. I felt something in my chest shift in a way that I don't think I can name accurately. He looked back at his notebook. He turned a page. He said, "I'm going to make you a maze." I said, "I'd like that." He said, "It'll be hard." I said, "I'd expect nothing less." He almost smiled. I could see it at the corner of his mouth, that almost smile that was his version of the whole thing. And then he bent over his notebook and started to draw. That was 18 months ago. I don't want to make this into something bigger than it is, or smaller either. Vivienne and I are together. We are figuring out what that looks like in the practical, daily sense, which turns out to be complicated and ordinary in equal measure. Who stays where on weeknights, how to handle school schedules, the fact that Roz has decided she wants a dog, and Theo has become her most committed advocate for the cause. The future is a thing we talk about openly and without performance. We are not performing. There are still moments when I'll pull up to her house in the F-150 with the cracked mirror and feel the gap between our lives as a material fact. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. I don't think pretending is useful. But there is also this. Last month Theo showed me the maze he'd been making since Saturday in the backyard. He handed it to me with both hands, the way you hand someone something that matters to you. 4 pages, taped together into a single sprawling thing, more intricate than anything I'd seen from him before. I sat down at the kitchen table and I tried to solve it. I couldn't. I genuinely couldn't find the way through for almost 20 minutes, and Theo sat across from me the whole time, very still, watching me try. When I finally found it, when the path opened up through a section I'd been ignoring in the upper left corner, I looked up at him. He was smiling. Not the almost smile, the real one. He said, "I made it so you had to slow down in the middle." I said, "I noticed." He said, "Most people skip the middle because it looks like a dead end, but it's not." I looked at the maze. I looked at the path I'd traced through it. I said, "Theo, you have to know that's pretty much a metaphor." He blinked. He didn't know what a metaphor was. "He is 9, I explained. He thought about it for a moment, and then he laughed, a full laugh, the kind that doesn't leave room for anything else. I thought about a boy who wouldn't talk to his therapist. I thought about a woman standing at a fence with her hands in her pockets. I thought about a dog named Biscuit who got out through a gap and happened to sit in a school parking lot and happened to catch both of us on the same morning. Roz appeared in the doorway. She looked at me. She looked at Theo. She said, "Is he showing you the maze?" I said, "He is." She said, "Did you find the middle part?" I said, "I did." She nodded, very satisfied. "I told him that was the best part," she said. She came over and looked at it upside down from across the table. Most people skip it. Theo looked at her. She looked at him. They had already said this to each other, I realized. Probably multiple times. He had probably shown her this maze months ago, in the way that kids share things with each other before they share them with us. She had already known where the path went. She had just let me find it myself. I have thought about that a lot, since. About what it means to see someone enough to let them find their own way through. About how rarely we actually do it. How often we point, or pull, or try to make the path obvious before the other person is ready for it. Vivienne walks into a room and builds trust before the contract. Roz makes room for both people in a friendship. Theo makes mazes where the hardest part is also the only part that matters. And me? I stayed with a dog on a morning I was late. That was all I did. I have come to think that was exactly enough.